Almighty and everlasting God, you always are more ready to hear than we to pray, and to give more than we either desire or deserve. I want to welcome some friends of mine who've come specially today. We play golf together, and there are colleagues of mine and John's from his professional life as a judge. I just want to say that people who play together stay together, and sometimes they worship together. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I also want to thank those who are joining us from other places online today. I especially want to welcome Broncy Millward, who was a little lady I met when I was visiting on the Isle of Iona when John and I went there a few years ago. And she visited me here in this church, and she had never been baptized. And at 75 years old, she became baptized. I count that as one of my most sacred moments as your deacon here. I have others, and I'll talk about those later. The Old Testament reading from Isaiah, the reading from Psalm 80, and our gospel reading from Matthew chapter 21, all unmistakably use the metaphor of the vineyard to explain something important for us to know. This is a metaphor that appears often in the Bible to symbolize life or life source. How is the imagery of the vineyard used to distill meaning from these appointed verses, these appointed readings today? What is the Spirit saying this day, at this time? Why does it matter? And how can it make a difference in our daily lives? At first glance, it appears that the reading from Isaiah is about a promising vineyard that has been lovingly planted with the expectation of a successful crop. But something happens to the grapes, despite all due diligence. Isaiah's listeners are the men of Judah, who are drawn into the story only to realize at the end that the blame for these bad grapes may point to themselves. Isaiah's message is prophetic concerning the coming destruction of the house of Judah and Jerusalem. Psalm 80 is clearly a lament about the suffering endured while the land of Israel and Jerusalem are in ruins, which had been predicted by Isaiah. Again, there is reference to the vine brought from Egypt that produced a flourishing vineyard in the land of milk and honey, as God had promised Moses. Its tendrils stretched to the sea, and its branches to the river, only to have its walls broken and ravaged by wild boars of the forest. In the parable of the wicked tenants, Jesus uses the vineyard as a metaphor predictive of the circumstances surrounding his own death. He draws the Pharisees into a seemingly logical conclusion when he poses the question of the fate of the greedy, murderous tenants, only to realize that it is perhaps themselves who are responsible. Now it seems that a vineyard that is endowed with a watchtower, a wine press, and a wall or a hedge around it should yield excellent crops. The purpose of a watchtower was to store the produce, house some of the workers, and allow oversight of the crops. It was important to care for the vineyard. It symbolizes diligence and attention to duty. Love. The wine press, or vat, was hewn from limestone of the highest quality and made to last. It wasn't just some, wooden rust bucket. It was the real deal. It represents confidence that due diligence will pay off and it will lead to a successful harvest. Hope. The wall or the hedge surrounding it is there to keep out foraging animals of the 4- and 2-footed variety. No thieves were going to be coming in and destroying this particular vineyard. The wall represents protection and assurance of the investment, security, faith. In all three of these narratives, there is the optimism about the vineyard. It has promise for a good outcome, but something goes wrong. In Isaiah, wild grapes are produced instead of good. In Psalm 80, the vineyard walls are broken and mangled, and strangers pick its fruit. In Matthew, the tenants of the vineyard are the ruination of themselves. If you've been following along the last few weeks, you notice that the parables are becoming more and more eschatological, relating more to judgment, death, and the final destiny of the soul. Chapter 21 of Matthew marks Jesus' entry into Jerusalem and his date with destiny. He is running out of time to make his message clear, and he knows it. This parable is particularly dark. The tenants in this vineyard displaying disregard for human life, wreaking destruction. A look at the backstory, however, lends clarity to their motives and insight to why Jesus told the story as he did. Newly planted vineyards take 3 to 4 years to produce much fruit. And if a landlord did not maintain his authority by regularly collecting rent or his proper share of the produce, usually 50%, for that period of 3 or 4 years, the tenants could legally establish ownership for themselves. So, when the harvest time approached, the wicked tenants saw their chance and rejected the landowner's servants by way of murder and mayhem. Not once, but twice. The third time, they rejected the landowner's own son, putting him to death as well. Following this story, Jesus asks the chief priests and Pharisees what is to happen to those wicked tenants. And they identify with the landowner's position of power. thereby condemning the tenants and suggesting that they be replaced with tenants who will bring fruit at the harvest time. In the history of church doctrine, the parable of the wicked tenants has often focused on a Christology, showing this is the point where the Jews, or Judaism, who are the original tenants, are replaced with Christians, the new tenants. Shamefully, it has been interpreted to justify anti-Semitism and other forms of exclusion and inhumanity to humankind. A better understanding is to consider how Jesus handles the chief priests and Pharisees who questioned his authority earlier in the chapter. Consider how Jesus explained that the authority to act in the temple on so-called behalf of God isn't as important as whether one is being obedient to the will of God. Likewise, in the parable of the two sons mentioned in last week's edition, in this week's episode we have, he explained why doing the will of God is more important than knowing who God is. Actions always speak louder than words. Professor Young Sung Kim of the Virginia Union Seminary says it this way: the parable of the wicked tenants is told in order to challenge vineyard workers, maybe us, to care for the vineyard with their responsibility. Otherwise, there will be a consequence, judgment, for their negligence. Which is to show God's impartial love for all until the end, is seen in this parable as well as in other parables such as the wheat, the weeds, and the talents. The point of the parable is not judgment per se, but a challenge to people so that they may love all, including enemies, until the end. I would add that judgment follows unpardoned sin. But to be in a right relationship with God is to show love for our neighbor, to care for God's creation, not for the fear of God, the fear of punishment, but for the love of God, because he first loved us. I leave you with some final thoughts on my last Sunday as your deacon. Change happens. It happens globally. It happens historically. It happens personally. It happens continually. Sometimes it's only apparent when it has already occurred and can only be seen retrospectively. Consider the church. From a historical perspective, it seems to reinvent itself every 500 years. American author and theologian Phyllis Tickle writes, "For Western Christianity, the Protestant or Great Reformation was about 500 years ago. 500 years before that, you hit the Great Schism, when the church divided between East and West. 500 years before that, you have Pope Gregory the Great, who helped bring the church out of the Dark Ages. What is happening to the church today should not be a big surprise. And what is happening globally is also happening locally. Ascension, like most human institutions, is fraught with change. It's ups, it's downs, and it's sideways. It is in good hands, from the good Lord's hands to those of Reverend George, Father Jayan, the vestry, and yours. Keep the faith, keep calm, and carry on. Our daily lives can be greatly enhanced and made easier to keep calm and carry on when they are enhanced by daily Bible readings and prayer. Investing a few minutes, the time it takes to brew a cup of coffee and read the morning headlines, can make a difference in your day and in your life. I'm happy to report at this particular day that the prayer request form has been restored on the Ascension Church website. It had gone away for a few months. No one's quite sure why, but it is back. And it is similar to the one that can be found in the pew racks right in front of you. You might take a moment to just look and see. It is also similar to the prayer request form found out in the prayer and pantry box out on the boulevard in front of the church. The intercessory prayer ministry meets once a week to pray these requests. And I'll just put in a little advertisement here. You're welcome to join the team anytime. Prayer, whether it's part of a team ministry or individually, is a simple way to store up your riches and prosper your own vineyard. Reach your branches to the sea and tendrils to the river. And finally, don't be those wild grapes. Take care of the vineyard. Climb up in that watchtower. Look around. Pay attention. We reap what we sow. Amen.